Committee will come to order. At the conclusion of opening statements yesterday, the chair called up H.R. 734, and the bill was open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, are there any other amendments? Seeing none. Question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 734 to the House. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Chair now calls up H.R. 639 as forwarded by the Subcommittee on Health and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 639 to amend the Controlled Substances Act with respect to drug scheduling recommendations by the Secretary of Health and Human Services and with respect to registration of manufacturers and distributors seeking to conduct clinical testing.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. The chair will recognize Mr. Pitts for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. DEA delays in scheduling.
Wait. The clerk needs to report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 639 offered by Mr. Pitts.
And without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. DEA delays in scheduling newly FDA-approved drugs are adversely impacting patients who need access to newly approved therapies. However, we have also heard from the DEA about their role in the scheduling process for newly approved medicines. My amendment attempts to strike the right balance. During its approval process, the FDA examines the abuse potential of the new drug and makes a scheduling recommendation to the DEA. Scientific and medical matters related to the scheduling recommendation are binding on the DEA, and over the last 15 years, the DEA has not made any scheduling decision for a new drug that was contrary to the FDA recommendation. However, DEA has raised concerns that under H.R. 639, the agency would no longer be able to provide its expertise in the process of scheduling a new drug before it can be marketed to patients. To address this concern, the amendment would allow for DEA to continue to conduct its own abuse liability analysis, but require the agency to schedule the new drug within 90 days of receiving FDA's recommendation or 90 days from FDA's approval of the drug, whichever comes later. DEA would have a meaningful opportunity to assess any potential diversion concerns while patients would have the peace of mind that the current open-ended process does not provide. Concerns have also been raised about the ambiguity in the law related to when a new drug's exclusivity and patent term restoration starts if it is subject to scheduling by DEA. The amendment today would clarify that for the subset of products that must be scheduled, these periods commence on the date a product can actually be marketed, just as it is for other new drug products. This bill is another example from this committee where we can work together in a bipartisan manner to help patients have timely access to new therapies. And I want to thank Ranking Member Pallone and Green for their partnership on this legislation and urge the support of all members. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Chair will recognize the gentleman from New Jersey to offer an amendment to the amendment.
That amendment is at the desk.
And without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say very quickly, this is an amendment that makes a few technical corrections to the amendment that Mr. Pitts just offered, and I would urge all of my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Are there other members wishing to speak on the amendment to the amendment? If not, the question occurs on the Pallone amendment to the Pitts amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The vote now occurs on the Pitts amendment as amended by the Pallone amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Amendment as amended is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question now occurs on the bill as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to and favorably reported out of the committee. Chair now calls up H.R. 471 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 471 to improve enforcement efforts related to prescription drug diversion and abuse and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 471 to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is favorably reported. Chair now calls up H.R. 647 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 647 to amend Title 12 of the Public Health Service Act to reauthorize certain trauma care programs and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Burgess,
yes, I just moved to strike the requisite number of words.
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I want to do that to thank you, Chairman Upton, of course, Chairman Pitts on the subcommittee, Ranking Member Pallone, Ranking Member Green on the subcommittee. The two trauma bills, 647 and 648, are important, both to Mr. Green and I believe to members of the committee as well. It's an issue where we've worked closely together. We've got a long record of bipartisanship working toward shoring up our nation's trauma systems and trauma centers. Trauma affects all individuals of all ages, 35 million Americans annually, one person every 15 minutes. At the subcommittee, I read a long list of supporting organizations. I do have letters of support representing this coalition, and I ask unanimous consent to enter all of them into the record.
Without objection.
This legislation is broadly supported by medicine. Both bills are bipartisan. They've gone through regular order, both reported out of the Health Subcommittee. I want to thank the Energy and Commerce Committee staff on both sides of the dais, Clay Alsbach, Katie Novaria, Adriana Simonelli, as well as Hannah Green. And with Mr. Green, I want to thank his staff, Kristen O'Neill. And finally, I want to thank J.P. Poliskevitz, who shepherded this bill through the process. I strongly urge the committee to support both of these bills. We'll look forward to their consideration by the House, and I'll be happy to yield back or yield to Mr. Green, whichever. Yield back.
Chairman yields back. Are there other members wishing to speak? Seeing none, the question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 647 to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Chair will now call up H.R. 648 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 648 to amend Title 12 of the Public Health Service Act to reauthorize certain trauma care programs and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, are there any other amendments? Seeing none, the question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 648 to the House. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Chair now calls up H.R. 212 as forwarded by the Subcommittee on the Environment and the Economy and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 212 to amend the Safe Drinking Water Act to provide for the assessment and management of the risk of algal toxins in drinking water and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I want to move to strike the last word. But in
Okay.
this, I want to make reference to an amendment that was added onto the text of the bill, and just thank Mr. Latta for including that in. It's important that we allow and consult with private industry whose research and development has worked significantly with this, and not just the EPA information. For example, when they had the algae bloom off Lake Erie, Bowling Green, Ohio, did not have the water problem that Toledo does, and Bowling Green, for example, used activated charcoal, so they did not have that problem. That's an important thing we can learn from private industry. I want to thank Mr. Latta for who's shown tremendous leadership in this and including that in, and with that, and also with Mr. Doyle for his support of this amendment as well. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Again, are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, question, are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chair,
Chair would recognize gentleman from New York.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the title.
Which number is your amendment, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Wait till the clerk reports the title of the amendment.
Which number, sir?
I'm not certain. Wait a minute.
Amendment to the committee print for H.R. 212 offered by Mr. Tonko of New York. After Section 2, add the following new section. Section 3, reauthorization of drinking water state revolving fund. A, references, except as otherwise specified, whenever in this section an amendment is expressed in terms of an amendment to a section of other provision, the reference shall be considered to be made to a section or other provision to the Safe Drinking Water Act, 42 U.S.C. 300 F et sec. B.
Mr. Chairman,
Without objection, the title will be considered as
I
read.
reserve a point of order.
And the gentleman from Illinois reserves a point of order, and the gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment reauthorizes the Safe Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, the primary source of funding for state and local governments to maintain and upgrade their drinking water systems. The amendment authorizes the SRF for 3 years, beginning in 2016 with $1.2 billion and rising to $1.6 billion in 2018. The amendment also includes a section authorizing funds to provide technical assistance and support for rural and small water systems. The authorization is for $20 million per year for 4 years. Small communities with their limited rate base operate on extremely tight budgets. They constantly struggle to comply with safe drinking water standards and maintain drinking water infrastructure for the people that they serve. Mr. Chair, we have been seriously underfunding infrastructure maintenance and repair for water treatment and delivery systems. I know there are those who will say we cannot afford to do more. Nonsense is my response. Not only can we afford it, we cannot afford to delay this any longer. It makes no financial sense to continue to allow critical infrastructure to deteriorate. It seems every week there is another report of a water main break in one or more drinking water systems. They happen across the country, every state, every region, not just in the district I represent. They happen in small communities and in major cities. Last year, Los Angeles, California experienced a water main break that sent 8 million gallons of treated water spilling across the University of California campus and creating a 15-foot hole in Sunset Boulevard. This past week in my district, the city of Amsterdam experienced a water main break. Water spilled down into the street where it froze into a sheet of ice, making driving treacherous and walking in the area very dangerous. It isn't just water leaking from those pipes. It's money, our money, money spent treating the water, money spent to respond to the emergency, money spent to patch and replace the pipe, money spent to repair the other infrastructure that is damaged by the sudden flooding, money spent by businesses and homeowners to deal with flooded basements, water shutoffs, and other damage to their businesses and personal property. We have programs to advise third world nations on how to build and maintain drinking water infrastructure. We tell them all about the value of clean water for public health purposes and economic development. We need to take our own advice. Water is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Any area that expects to attract business and retain residents must have functioning, reliable drinking water infrastructure. I do appreciate the bill that Representative Latta has brought to our committee. I certainly intend to support it. But we also need to go further. We need to address the backlog of infrastructure repair and replacement projects that exist across this country. that have rendered us a third world nation at times. I know I am not alone in this concern. We've heard from water utilities, associations of civil engineers, and the people in our districts who are struggling to cope with these problems. We know what we need to do. Now we need to just simply do it. Let's not continue to waste water and money. Let's do what is required. Let's fix the systems that sustain us. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. You want time?
I'm speak on his.
You want to speak?
Yeah.
Gentleman, Chair will recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to indicate my support for the Tonko amendment. Our water infrastructure is in a dangerous state of disrepair, and most of it has been determined to be at or beyond the end of its useful life. Every time EPA has assessed our drinking water infrastructure needs, the needs have gone up significantly, and industry estimates are even higher. The American Water Works Association has estimated that it will take more than $1 trillion in investment in water infrastructure over the next 25 years to sustain delivery of clean and safe water. And time and again, we've heard testimony that greater investment in drinking water infrastructure is desperately needed. Just last week at the Environmental Subcommittee's hearing on this bill, witnesses representing EPA, water utilities, and state drinking water administrators all expressed support for reauthorization of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and increasing the amount of available monies. I just want to stress, we just can't keep taking clean water for granted. Providing the American people with safe drinking water is a fundamental duty of the government, and we can't do that without investing in our infrastructure. This amendment is an important step towards helping public water systems continue to deliver safe, affordable drinking water to the American people, and I hope we can work together on this issue, so I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And does Mr. Shimkus still insist on this point of order?
Yes, I do.
Gentleman insists on this point of order. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on the point of order briefly?
I think that due to the germaneness issue, I would just ask that you withdraw the amendment.
I hear the request to withdraw the amendment. Would like to get a commitment that the committee would work on this issue. We would love to work with you to develop a sound program that responds to the communities across this country. It's a tremendous resource that is required for a modern society. We can't bury our heads in the sand any longer.
Would the gentleman yield? Yeah, as my friend, the ranking member of the subcommittee knows, that we have already, which you have agreed to attend a meeting with Mr. Harper to start talking about some of these issues. I would hope that you and he will have great discussions, and that you can bring through the committee something that's worthy of the subcommittee and the full committee. So we look forward. I mean, you're very passionate. We appreciate that passion. No one disregards the challenges this nation faces on this issue. But I would encourage you to continue to work with Mr. Harper, and hopefully we can get something out that's good.
Well, I hear that, and I respect that, and we certainly are reaching out to Representative Harper, but his bill is a small piece of the greater measure that we're trying to introduce, and I would just want to state that clearly for the record. This is about super infrastructure. From states from the Northeast and East Coast all the way over to the issue I mentioned in California, there are major critical issues that are costing us not only dollars, but certainly challenge our public health and safety.
Ms. Heshu has a question.
You're yielding?
Gentleman from New Jersey, time, so.
I yield to the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you. I just want to ask the chairman of the committee, what's the problem with what Mr. Tonko is proposing?
Well, the question here is germaneness on the subject matter.
I see.
I think based on the small
But is there
unscripted colloquy between Mr. Shimkus and Mr. Tomko that we
Is
can
there
in
an
fact have some
intention? Is
discussion.
there an intention to seriously work on it so that it will be germane, so that it can be brought back up, or is it?
Well, again,
just
we
maybe-
only saw this amendment this morning,
Uh-huh.
so what didn't come up in the subcommittee, and that's for quick question, when it was run through the Parles across the street, they did cite that it was not germane to the bill.
Well, since you're just getting to look at it, I just don't have the feeling that there's a seriousness about a commitment to work this out so that it will be germane. This is a big issue for all of us.
Would the gentleman yield?
It's my time. Look, let me just say this. I didn't want to have a vote on the germaneness because I don't really know whether it's germane or not. I think what we'd like to see, and Ms. Eshu pointed out, is if we could get, maybe I could just ask you, Mr. Chairman, directly, that if we can get a commitment that we will work together on this whole infrastructure issue that Mr. Tonko is bringing up, because it is an important issue, obviously, not only in the context of safe drinking water and in general, but specifically with regard to the infrastructure issue. If we can just get a commitment that we will address this, that we'll talk about it more, and we'll take it up seriously.
I think we'd like, if the gentleman yield, I think we'd
Yes.
be delighted to have a number of discussions. We only saw the amendment this morning at 8 o'clock. So it's not a problem to have discussions. And I know that Mr. Shimkus, Mr. Harper, Mr. Tomko, be delighted to see that opportunity arise.
I will withdraw the amendment with the commitment that we will sit down and work on this, and also with the awareness that the feds have reduced their commitment to states, local governments on the revenue that is required to maintain these systems. So with that stated and with the commitment made here publicly to continue to work on the issue, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Continue to have this discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So with that, the amendment is withdrawn. Are there further amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Here are a couple. Gentleman from California, I see. Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have an amendment at the desk?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the title of the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print for H.R. 212, offered by Mr. McNerney of California.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Harper.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order against the amendment.
Point of order is reserved, and the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the bill's authors, Mr. Latta, Ms. Miller, Mr. Quigley, and Ms. Captur for their advocacy on this issue of clean and safe drinking water. I'm glad that this legislation will be moving forward. The Safe Drinking Water Act was established to protect health by regulating the nation's drinking water supply. This mission hasn't changed, but new elements and activities threaten our water supplies, including climate change, drought, algal blooms, and other factors. Over the past few years, more and more Western states, including California, have been stricken by drought conditions. Droughts impact the people in many different ways. Water and energy prices increase, agricultural production suffers, and access to critical resources becomes more challenging. Droughts can be a cause of algal blooms. When the water levels drop, nutrient levels and concentrations rise, which feed algae. So this is a germane issue. It's an issue, drought is an issue that affects and feeds algal blooms. Now California is entering its 4th year of drought, and we've seen the consequences of not adequately...
Mr. Chairman, the committee is not in order.
Gentleman is correct.
Thank you.
Gentleman will continue.
California is entering its 4th year of drought, and we've seen the consequences of not adequately preparing for water shortages and infrastructure system needs. My amendment directs the EPA to develop a strategic plan for assessing and managing risks of drought to drinking water provided by public water systems, including the risk of algal blooms to safe drinking water. It also establishes guidance around analytical methods and ways in which to protect drinking water as it becomes limited due to drought conditions. Mr. Chairman, I want to see the efforts of this bill succeed in protecting drinking water. I'd like to thank my colleague, Ms. Masui, for co-sponsoring this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there members wishing to speak on the amendment? Gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps.
Strike the last word. and I strongly support, thank you, I strongly support the McNerney amendment. This amendment strengthens the underlying bill by helping us prepare our water systems for all the problems they face, not just harmful algal blooms. Droughts pose many serious problems for the safety and availability of drinking water, and we are unfortunately woefully unprepared to properly address these problems. For example, there's a lake in my district, Lake Kachuma, which is the primary source of drinking water for the Santa Barbara area. This lake is quickly being depleted due to the ongoing California drought, and the water level is currently expected to drop below the gravity-fed intake tunnels by April or May. That is very short time from now. To ensure local residents could continue getting water, the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board had to build an emergency pumping system to get the water into the system once water levels drop below the intake tunnels. The project received a $2 million grant from the state and additional grants from the Bureau of Reclamation to pay $300,000 worth of electrical costs for this. But to date, this project has cost a total of $4.3 million. This is just one example of the multitude of problems our drinking water systems will face as droughts become more frequent and severe due to climate change. Water will need to be conserved, recycled, and treated differently as droughts become more frequent and severe because of this cause. And that's why this amendment is so important. Creating a comprehensive assessment of the threats to safe drinking water posed by drought will help the EPA and local communities we represent better prepare for the future. It's also important to note that mitigating and adapting to these threats will require significant infrastructure funding, similar to what's happening at my Lake Kachuma. In addition to developing strategic plans, we should also be authorizing additional funding for the State Revolving Fund and other federal infrastructure programs to help our local communities actually implement these strategies. A strategic plan is worthless if it just sits on a shelf due to a lack of funding to implement it. So EPA needs additional resources to help our local communities prepare for the evolving and growing threats to our water systems. I will soon be reintroducing legislation to help provide these resources, and I know that Mr. McNerney, Mr. Tonko, and other of our colleagues also have bills to address these water infrastructure issues as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope H.R. 212 is just the beginning of a more comprehensive effort by this committee to address the entirety of what I believe is a very serious problem. Adopting the McNerney amendment would be a good step in this direction. I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Mr. Tomko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. As I stated earlier, drinking water is not something we can do without, and I think the effort here by Mr. McNerney is an improvement to the bill under consideration. When water sources are drawn down, it's proven that the problems of obtaining and treating drinking water increase. Salinity, suspended solids, and other contaminants can be more concentrated and therefore harder to remove from our given water supplies. Given the large area of our nation that is experiencing drought, I believe we really need to support this amendment because we need to better understand this risk and to have better ways to manage it. So I speak in support of the amendment by Mr. McNerney, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Does the gentleman from Mississippi insist on his point of order?
Mr. Chairman, I regret I must insist on the point of order. The amendment violates Clause 7 of Rule 16 of the Rules of the House because it is not germane to the underlying bill.
Gentleman insists on his point of order. Are there any members wishing to speak briefly on the point of order? Chair is prepared to rule in support of the point of order. Does the gentleman from California wish to rule?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to reiterate that drought causes a reduction in water levels and increase in the concentration of nutrients, which do feed algal blooms. So I feel it's in order, but I'll let the chair decide on that.
Well, I'll note that we did check with the parliamentarians, and they confirmed that in fact it is subject to a point of order. So, do you want me to? So, as the gentleman noted, Mississippi Clause 7 of Rule 16 of the Rules of the House prohibits the committee from considering non-germane amendments. The precedents of the House set forth several general tests for germaneness They include the fundamental purpose test, the jurisdiction test, and the subject matter test. And having reviewed the amendment, the chair finds that the amendment does violate that with respect to the underlying bill. Therefore, the chair sustains the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Gentleman is recognized.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I will go ahead and withdraw this, but I ask the chairman's indulgence in working to find a way to include the effects of drought, especially in that they do feed algal blooms.
I know that it is an issue, particularly in California, and I think we might have some joint jurisdiction with the Natural Resources Committee, but enjoy talking and listening and seeing if there might be a way that we can move together.
Mr. Chairman, could I strike the last word a minute? I wanted to point out, we had a discussion with Mr. Shimkus earlier. As you know, when we had the subcommittee markup on this, I guess it was earlier this week or last week, I made the point that you were working, and Mr. Shimkus was working with Mr. Tonko in trying to include some Democratic amendments in this bill, and they were included. And I do appreciate the fact that that the chairman and the ranking member of the subcommittee were working together, and that was accomplished. But as you can see, we have several amendments today that we think have to be addressed, and that go to issues that we didn't negotiate an agreement on. And as Mr. Shimkus knows, I was concerned at the time that even though we did follow regular order, we went right from a hearing to a markup, the same day. So I would ask that with all of these amendments that are going to come up, I think that in every case here we're going to have amendments that are probably going to be declared non-germane, and that the members are going to withdraw them. But I would ask that in each case, given the fact that we didn't have a lot of time since last week, that we would take some time before we go to the floor, and either in the context of this bill or further down the road, that we have some further discussions and try to accommodate and deal with these issues. Because I think every one of these issues, starting with the infrastructure issue, is something that, over the next, during this session, we should be dealing with. So if I could just get the chairman's
Well, if the
agreement on
gentleman yield, it is an unusual practice that we had last week, where we went right from the hearing to the markup. There are lots of extenuating circumstances, not only with Washington being shut down for the weather-wise. We had the prayer breakfast, a whole number of different. That is not going to be our normal practice, and it's.
And so, under that, and again, I know that Mr. Shimkus worked hard with Mr. Tonko to try to incorporate some Democratic amendments, and they were incorporated. But we do have these additional ones that we're going to raise today. They're all going to be withdrawn, and I think if we could just continue to talk about these issues over the next few weeks or month, we certainly would appreciate that, because they are important.
They are. I recognize that, and there's, as I look at the members of the committee, they're not two finer gentlemen than Mr. Tomko and Mr. Shimkus. The solid relationship that they have together, we appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. With that, the amendment is withdrawn. Are there further amendments to the bill? Gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps. Amendment at the desk?
Amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the title of the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print for H.R. 212, offered by Mrs. Capps of California. After Section 2, add the following new section. Section 3, amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act relating to
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order against the amendment.
Point of order is reserved. The ask unanimous consent that the title of the amendment be read. Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as policymakers, as you know, we have a responsibility to create the policies that advocate the best interests of current and future generations. Ensuring that everyone has access to safe, clean, and abundant drinking water is one such responsibility. My amendment would simply add a new section at the end of the bill requiring EPA to develop a strategic plan for assessing and managing the risks of climate change to drinking water. The language is very similar to that of the underlying bill, and would in no way hinder EPA's ability to develop its harmful algal bloom strategy. In fact, my amendment would strengthen the underlying bill by requiring EPA to examine the full array of environmental factors that contribute to harmful algal blooms. Water temperature, salinity, and nutrient availability all dictate where and when the algal species responsible for these blooms thrive and survive. And the expected changes in these environmental factors due to climate change will likely increase the frequency, the duration, timing, and intensity of harmful algal blooms. For example, it's well documented that algal blooms most often occur in warm waters, primarily during summer months. It's also well documented that climate change can contribute to warmer waters and longer summers, thus increasing the number of potentially harmful blooms in the future. Climate change is also predicted to alter the frequency and severity of droughts and severe storms. Changes to evaporation and precipitation patterns can make fresh water around the country saltier, which supports the survival of certain harmful algal species that have higher tolerances to salinity. Intense rainfall can also increase nutrient runoff into water bodies, which can lead to faster algae growth and more harmful algal blooms. This problem is exacerbated when intense storms are followed by periods of drought, which has been seen around the country, including in the Great Lakes and along the East Coast. In addition to altering the timing, duration, and severity of harmful algal blooms, climate change also poses several other threats to safe drinking water and public health. Rising sea levels, for example, threaten coastal water systems through saltwater intrusions, and increasing flooding from stronger storms and sea level rise can cripple drinking water systems that are not adequately prepared. The threats to safe drinking water posed by climate change are diverse and they are serious, and we do have a responsibility to help communities mitigate them. My amendment would simply direct EPA to look at all these threats to drinking water safety, rather than just a narrow piece of the puzzle. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 212 is a well-intentioned bill, and I commend its authors for the bipartisan effort. One of the strengths of the bill is that it relies on the best available science to develop a strategic plan. But if we trust scientists to assess the threat of harmful algal blooms to our drinking water, we should also trust them to assess any and all threats that they deem relevant, including climate change. We can't pick and choose what science we want to believe or pay attention to. Like it or not, science tells us that safe drinking water is threatened by both harmful algal blooms and climate change. We owe it to our constituents to respect the science and do everything we can to make sure that our folks have safe water to drink now and in the future. My amendment would help achieve this goal, and I urge my colleagues to adopt it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Mr. Tomko.
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word. I stand in support of the Capps amendment. I applaud Representative Capps for providing the sort of thoughtfulness about climate change as it relates to this legislation. Climate change poses a real risk both to sources of water and to water infrastructure. The recent large hurricanes that swept through the Gulf Coast and the Northeast showed how vulnerable drinking water systems are to these events. I've seen it in my district. Increased drought poses risks for some areas, while flooding poses risks for other areas. Temperature changes also increase some pollution problems. With harmful algal blooms, for example, they may become more prevalent. They like warm water. If we understand the risks and act now to make our drinking water systems more resilient and resistant to these risks, we will save money and be ready for the changes we face. So I fully stand in support of this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair would recognize gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask that we oppose this amendment and just kind of remind people that H.R. 212 creates a strategic plan to tackle the biological phenomenon of harmful algae growth in source water and to shore up information gaps that EPA has on harmful algal blooms. It is intentionally not prescriptive because it does not prejudge the answers. Shouldn't the focus be on how we deal with cyanotoxins in the water source used for drinking water? The risk of trying to make this bill do everything for everybody is that it could wind up being nothing for anybody, leaving harmful algal blooms right outside the intake of some drinking water utility pipes. So I appreciate my colleagues and friends. I understand their concerns. I appreciate their passion. The bill is really designed to be a directive to identify this problem that happened in Ohio in a bipartisan manner along with Bob Latta and Marcy Kaptur. And my fear is if we add and bolt on all these additional issues, we will not get it to the floor.
The gentleman yield.
I will.
You know, the gentleman, I understand the gentleman. I know that, you know, Ms. Kaptur is one of the, you know, main people that's also pushing for this legislation. And I understand that, again, this is something locally that needs to be addressed. But, you know, you have to understand that the issue of, and I'm sure you do, that the issue of climate change is not only something that we as Democrats care very much about, but that we, not only here in the committee, but I also believe in the House as a whole, feel has not been addressed, and that, you know, many, as you know, many Republicans, I'm not speaking for yourself, but there are many Republicans who feel that it's an issue that doesn't even exist, at least in terms of human impact, which many of us disagree with. So I think you have to understand that we are going to continue to raise the issue of climate change whenever we think it's appropriate to bring up. I mean, when we had our organizational meeting of the committee, I raised it and I tried to get it into the organizational plan, which I knew that would be defeated. But it is a major issue for us that impacts almost everything that we do in this committee, not even just in the subcommittee that Mr. Tonko is the ranking member of. So I understand you want to move this bill. Again, you know, due to germaneness or whatever, you know, these amendments will be withdrawn. But understand that we feel very strongly that the issue of climate change does have to be addressed, not only in this committee, but in the House as a whole. And we are going to continue to raise it. In my own district, as Mr. Tonko mentioned, you know, I was the district that was hit most by Superstorm Sandy, and we still haven't recovered from it over 2 years later. And it had impacts in everything, drinking water, utilities, plants, everything was impacted. So it's hard to find an issue that does not have some relationship to climate change. I yield back.
Reclaiming my time, I would just say I remember a young ranking member on the Health Subcommittee who kept harassing his chairman about having hearings on a particular subject, so I appreciate those comments.
Gentleman yields back. Other members wishing to speak? Gentlelady from California.
I don't want to cut off anyone else who wants to speak, but I understand that there's probably going to be a point of order against this amendment. And in anticipation of that, I'm prepared to withdraw it. But it doesn't, if I could just make one comment, it doesn't make the problem go away in many of our drought-stricken areas. And so I would ask for assurances from the chairman that this topic will be addressed and that we will continue to look for ways that we can respond that are effective and meaningful to our constituents.
Let me just, if the gentlelady will yield, I know that we're all looking forward to the Administrator of EPA coming to testify here shortly, and I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions on the issues that are being raised today with the amendments. Does the gentleman insist on this point of order?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do.
He does, and before the chair rules, the author wish to withdraw the amendment?
I'm willing
He
to
does.
withdraw.
The amendment is withdrawn. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seen, gentleman from Maryland. At the desk.
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will report the title of the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print for H.R. 212, offered by Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I
Sarbanes.
reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. The clerk will read the title of the amendment. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is being offered to require the Environmental Protection Agency to develop a strategic plan for assessing and managing drinking water-related risks associated with hydraulic fracturing operations. The practice of hydraulic fracturing, which has become quite pervasive now, is having a significant positive impact on our energy security. We know that. But the regulation of fracking has not kept pace with that, and there are concerns about the impact it has on drinking water. As it happens, EPA is currently working on a study of the drinking water impacts of fracking. That study, which we expect to be completed this spring, will outline the mechanisms by which fracking impacts drinking water supplies. Because of EPA's extensive work preparing that study, we know already that there are impacts at all stages of the fracking process. At the beginning of the process, there are significant amounts of water which are drawn from aquifers, which potentially impacts drinking water supplies. At the end of the process, there are large amounts of wastewater that are sent for disposal, potentially overwhelming wastewater treatment works and dumping pollution into our surface waters. And of course, throughout the process of fracking, the fracking itself and surface spills of fracking fluids, which we've seen occur, do pose some serious risks. There's long been as well an absence of real transparency around what chemicals fracking companies are mixing and injecting into our ground, but we know that many of them do pose risk to drinking water. I want to emphasize I support this bill, the underlying bill, which pairs assessment and management of drinking water impacts. For fracking, EPA has been hard at work on the assessment side, as I indicated, but doesn't have in place a strategic plan to manage the drinking water impacts that have been or will be identified. That's why I'm offering the amendment to ensure an effective response to protect public health. I do want to mention that the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which I and other members whose districts intersect with it jealously seek to protect, the footprint of that watershed is New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Delaware. The footprint of the Marcellus Shale deposit is New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. So you have almost a complete overlap of the watershed and the Marcellus Shale deposit, which means it's really critical that we understand what negative impacts can come from fracking, particularly in the region that I'm speaking about. So this is a common sense opportunity for us to get the kind of management of the impacts of hydraulic fracturing on drinking water. And I think that if you sat with certainly any one of my constituents, and I think the average citizen out there, and said, the EPA is doing this study, they're going to determine what the impacts of fracking are on drinking water, and we think it's a good idea to have a strategic plan in place to manage those risks and potential harms going forward. They would say that's absolutely a common sense thing to do and would support it. And for that reason, I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the amendment. And I yield back.
Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. To address the issue of protecting our water supplies, it needs to be holistic, and this is yet another issue that needs to be addressed in terms of the hydraulic fracturing that Representative Sarbanes has introduced here in form of an amendment. In New York State, we currently have a ban on fracking, and this issue is and has been highly controversial in my state, where water resources are highly valued. When this committee granted an exception to the Safe Drinking Water Act for the shale gas industry, they set up this controversy. I believe the Representative Sarbanes, is attempting to address that, that exemption. Even in my home state of New York, where water regulation is very strong, the public does not trust that the industry necessarily will protect their water. So where there are risks, we need to deal with them. I strongly support this, this effort, the amendment that addresses hydraulic fracturing, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman insist on his point of order?
He is doing this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, on the point of order, I gather the objection can be based on jurisdiction or subject matter and so forth, and I'm obviously not a parliamentarian. I know there's a ruling coming
There could one
at your insistence, but I would just say this: if you said to the average person who's turning their tap on and expecting clean water to come out of it, we decided to focus on the impacts that X, Y, and Z have on whether that water is drinkable, but we didn't look at A, B, and C. They would say, well, that seems to be all part of the same subject matter as far as I'm concerned. I just want to know that if the water goes into this glass and I drink it, I'm going to be okay. And I understand that's not the parliamentary standard, perhaps, but just looking at it from the point of view of the average citizen out there, I think that's important to note. And I would say I'm prepared to withdraw the amendment based on the parliamentary objection on germaneness.
Yeah.
But I would encourage the committee going forward, and hopefully the chairman will support this, to take a closer look at these impacts on drinking water of hydraulic fracturing, particularly since we are going to have a good study from the Environmental Protection Agency, and it would be kind of a waste when we receive that study and the public receives it, not to know that there's a strategic plan in place for managing the risks that it identifies going forward. So hopefully that's a discussion the committee can continue to have. With that, I'm
If the
prepared.
gentleman yield, so this bill is focused on certain living organisms, of which fracking is not. So, but again, as I indicated on the last amendment, we are looking forward to having Administrator McCarthy here in a couple weeks. And I'm sure that this is going to be an extensive subject, and we're going to make sure that it's hopefully not on a getaway day, so that we'll be able to have her for an extended period of time for questions on both sides of the aisle.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me go first to Mr. Pallone and then Mr. Shimkus.
I don't know who has the time, but I want to say, I know, again, the germaneness is here. I mean, I don't know whether it's the case or not, but I know that the gentleman is going to withdraw his amendment. But like climate change, fracking obviously is a major issue that, comes under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee in particular, in this case dealing with drinking water, or in many other respects, not only for the subcommittee, but for the committee as a whole. And, when I go home, this is what people talk about. They're concerned about climate change. They're concerned about fracking and the impacts. Our municipalities, our state legislatures are all dealing with this in various ways. So again, I think that I understand that we're taking this up in the context of this particular bill, and this bill is going to move forward without it. But I do think that this is an issue that we need to address and, discuss in a larger sense in this committee over the next few weeks or the next few months. So I appreciate the fact that the gentleman from Maryland is raising it at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shimkus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. The regulatory authority is held with the state on the fracking issue. That's why New York has been able to ban it, and while other states have passed rules and regulations. Illinois has a very aggressive regulatory regime. In fact, they haven't even permitted any fracking, led by a Democrat governor and a Democrat legislature. So I think that's another debate of who actually has the authority. Now, some will say we should be national authority, but of course, we would say should be held with the states.
Will the gentleman yield?
I would.
Just for a moment? Very fair point, and obviously there are states that are being more aggressive than others. Maryland, as does New York, has a moratorium in place right now. But getting back to the watershed, these rivers know no state boundaries. It's not like some contaminant coming up to the Maryland state border from Pennsylvania decides to stop there, comes through the Susquehanna watershed. And when you look at it through the watershed lens, you understand that there's a regional dimension to this that can really only be managed by having the kind of oversight that can be provided by a federal agency like the Environmental Protection Agency. So I hope we have that discussion going forward, just so we don't frustrate the efforts of the states to do the right thing. But states are next to each other, and they're impacted by what happens upstream, certainly. And I'll yield back.
Chair would recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that several excellent points have been made, both in terms of the regulatory responsibilities in the states, but also what is happening all around this issue. I would venture to say that probably more than half of the full committee maybe have really never done a deep dive on the issue. And I think that it deserves, there are some that know a lot, there are some that know very little, but I think that the full committee really needs to be informed on this. because it is an issue that is right out there. It's wedded to one part, a major part of it, of our country becoming independent of foreign oil and our energy supplies. But that's not the only part of it. So what I'm asking you, Mr. Chairman, is to make a commitment that there's a hearing on this. This should really have a thorough examination. And after that thorough examination, members, as we always do, we draw a great deal from the witnesses that come in, and including the lead agency, and then people can make up their minds about where the facts take them. But this is large enough, important enough for this important committee to have a hearing on it. So I'm asking that that you begin to put that in place and work with the subcommittee and the chairs it and the ranking member. I think it deserves that kind of attention.
Chair will reclaim his time. Again, I know this is an issue that it's going to be raised when EPA comes. I will recall well an amendment that was prepared for the House floor, and at the urgence of some Democratic leaders, the amendment was not offered on the House floor, knowing what its result was going to be. So we'll come back to this. Let me just, again, I was asking if the point of order was going to be insisted upon. With that, I might just yield to Mr. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the amendment is not withdrawn or if their point of order is not sustained, I'll have multiple comments. But I think the record should reflect a 360-degree view of the practice of hydraulic fracturing. So I'm going to keep this very brief since we have the point of order pending or potential withdrawal. The allegations made about hydraulic fracturing are not correct that you've heard in the record so far. But and that's been substantiated by every Obama administration administrator or official who has testified before Congress for the last 6 years. And so I think it's important that the record reflect that. This is a solution in search of a problem. If it does come up, we can have a more robust discussion later on. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. My time has expired. Gentleman insists on his point of order.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I insist
prior
on the
to
order.
ruling, does the gentleman wish to withdraw?
Chairman, prior to ruling, I will I'll withdraw the amendment, but hope that the committee will give it the attention that's been requested.
I think we'll
today.
be looking forward to that. Amendment is withdrawn. Are there further amendments to the bill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady is recognized. Does she have an amendment to the bill? The clerk will report the title of the bill, of the amendment, rather.
Amendment to the committee print for H.R. 212.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order against the
Point of order is reserved, and the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you,
for 5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. I offer the amendment to H.R. 2012, the Clark Amendment, otherwise known as the Drinking Water Protection Act. This amendment is based on Drinking Water Security Bill that was passed in the House in the 111th Congress. The bill was the product of a bipartisan negotiation and collaboration between this committee and the Committee on Homeland Security. And while we are speaking to naturally occurring phenomena with the scope of this bill, ensuring the safety and security of America's drinking water is a paramount concern to all members here today. H.R. 212 critically addresses the risk posed by particular contaminants that may make their way into the drinking water supply. Indeed, while it is critical to analyze the effects of toxins and for the Environmental Protection Agency to draw up a plan to mitigate these risks, it is equally important to guarantee the security of water systems infrastructure. This amendment will enhance our homeland security, improving protections for employees, neighbors, and local communities while ensuring the continued delivery of clean and safe drinking water. Through this important amendment, the EPA will help to identify and assess vulnerabilities in the covered water systems. Identifying these vulnerabilities can help mitigate not only naturally occurring phenomena, but just as importantly, intentional acts of sabotage. It is a time to finally close the security gap with such profound consequences for our communities living around drinking water facilities and beyond. That is why I'm offering this amendment to H.R. 212 and ask my colleagues to join me in support. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Did you want time? Chair will recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank the gentlewoman from New York for raising this very important issue, regardless of, you know, what we end up doing with the amendment today. I certainly support it. And, you know, she's from New York, but if you look at the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, we have, I don't know, I'm going to venture to guess, 20 million people concentrated in a relatively small area. And there's a tremendous amount of concern at home about, you know, the impact if there was some kind of terrorist attack or some other effort to contaminate drinking water. So the whole issue of security in the context of drinking water is really so important, because in the wrong hands, you know, dangerous chemicals or other intentional terrorist acts could really have a terrible impact on our whole population. So I just want to say once again, I know this is going to be withdrawn, but this is something that we definitely need to address and is, you know, within the scope, obviously, of the subcommittee and the full committee. So thank you again.
Chair would recognize Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want, you know, for the record, I think it's not accurate to portray this as a bipartisan bill. If you go into the record of the dissenting opinions, it's pretty clear that there was a lot of dissent on this bill. So again, we want to focus on the narrow scope of this language. This actually makes it way beyond its means, and we look forward to working with people in the future. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back to the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Clark, for her very thoughtful amendment. Both of us hailing from the state of New York understand what intentional attack can mean. We witnessed that through the devastation of 9/11 and know that there are great impacts that can be felt by communities. Security, physical security, and cybersecurity are vital to our critical infrastructure systems. Drinking water is certainly one of those critical systems. This is another area where the federal government should be a strong partner with state and local governments and with water utilities to ensure the continued safety of our drinking water supplies. An accident or an intentional attack on these resources is something we hope never to face. Prevention and certainly preparation are the best ways to ensure that we never do. So with that, I support the amendment by Representative Clark and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman still insist on his point of order?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I insist on the point of order. The amendment violates Clause 7 of Rule 16 of the Rules of the House because it's not germane to the underlying bill.
Before the chair rules, does the gentlelady wish to withdraw her amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I will withdraw the amendment. However, I want us to recognize that we're missing an opportunity here to really address a gap in the work that we're doing. The concern of our drinking water is both biological and intentional, and we need to be very cognizant of that, as has been stated by my colleagues here on this side of the aisle. But I do withdraw, Mr.
Gentlelady withdraws her amendment. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 212 to the House. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bills reported by the committee today, so ordered. And without objection, the committee stands adjourned.